Hello, and thank you very much for contributing to this series of interviews.
Thank you.
I was wondering if I could start by asking you to introduce yourself, your name and where you work.
Yes, I'm Gerdt Sundström, Professor Emeritus of Gerontology at the Institute of Gerontology in Sweden. Nowadays, I work as a consultant for the Swedish Federation of Retired Persons.
Great. So, we're going to be talking about long-term care, but the concept of long-term care varies from, or the understanding of long-term care varies from one country to the other. So I was wondering if you could very briefly just tell us what you mean when you will be talking about long-term care. What do you mean by that? Which services for which sort of people?
Well, in Sweden, we normally mean the whole panorama of services, from daycare, home help, home care, to transportation services, which are very extensive in Sweden, alarm systems, and over to residential care.
Great, thank you very much. So now you've introduced yourself, if we could learn about your perceptions of the situation in Sweden in long-term care. So if the question would be, if you could think about what the three policy priorities in long-term care at the moment in Sweden, what would those be, in your view?
That is a tough question. I think the big question that is discussed in Sweden right now is privatization, that is marketization of services, but it's really not a free market. It's the fact that the local authorities commission private companies to provide those services with public money, and the users of these services are assessed just as before the reform by public administrators. So there are different views on whether this is good or bad, but the fact is we know nothing about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So any other priorities you would want to underline?
Well, the part of that reform is to curb the increase in costs, because we spend 3% of our national income on services for older people, and the general feeling is that we shouldn't spend more and we should use that money more wisely than we do today.
And is there a feeling that the current international financial crisis is contributing to that sort of challenge, or is it quite independent?
No, we had this debate and these reforms already before the crisis, and it has nothing to do really with that.
Great. Do you see these priorities, these challenges that you've identified, remaining in the foreseeable future, being here in 5 or 10 years' time, or do you see other problems coming in the future?
Well, I think people will realize that these reforms are for the better, and they're also quite cautious reforms. I think it's typical of the Nordic countries that we do reforms, but we do them very piecemeal and slowly, and seldom anything radical. After all, we have 500 years, like England, of local obligations of local authorities to provide services, and there's no change really in that.
Thank you. So now if you could think of yourself as some sort of benevolent dictator, and you had the opportunity to introduce one policy in long-term care, what would you see as the main priority? It's a tough question, isn't it?
Yes. We always should try to provide better services for people who live in their own homes. Not just the services, but also making sure that the housing is adequate, and all this environment around people, like transportation and access to shops and all those things are.
So would the policy be to increase the resources in order to be able to do those things, or is it a question of changing the way the system is organized?
Both, because it's common in Sweden to say that we need more money, we need more resources, but often the answer is to use the existing resources more wisely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And in terms of research, on long-term care in Sweden, which piece of evidence do you think is missing at the moment that we should really concentrate on?
The big lack is that we don't know about these market reforms, how they work. We need data on individuals, because most of the information we have today is macro statistic in character.
Thank you. So now I wanted to finish with 5 questions, which we're calling the Quickfire round. And here what I'm trying is, I would like you to try to do is to rate the system on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst, 10 is the best, and just give us your rating. You can then, elaborate a little bit if you want, on 5 issues. The first one is about, the extent to which long-term care is seen as a policy priority in Sweden. So if on a scale from 1 to 10, where do you think it lies?
I would say 8 or 9, because we have surveys that from time to time show that people in general think this is very important, and they say they are willing to pay taxes or even more taxes to support these programs.
Thank you. And so does that follow that, so the second rating is about public awareness, but from what you were saying, it might follow that people are really aware of what the system has got to offer to people with long-term conditions, or is that long-term care needs, or is that not the case? How aware are people of what the system can offer?
I would rate that also somewhere around 7, 8, because knowledge is not perfect about all the different kinds of services you can get. And there's also, for the last 5-10 years, we have recurrent scandals in the media especially about nursing homes. People are a little worried about the state of the public services.
Thank you. So overall, if you now had to rate how well the system is meeting the needs of people with long-term care needs, what sort of rating would you give the Swedish system?
I would give it a good rating, like 8-9%. From our studies, we see that most of needy older persons do get the help they need.
Thank you.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Well, nothing is perfect, I guess.
No.
And what about the carers, the needs of carers? How well are they met on a scale from 1 to 10?
Well, we have actually done a couple of studies on that, and most carers say that they don't need any support and they don't want any. And that is supported by the fact that many municipalities have so-called care support consultants, something like that. It's difficult to translate literally. And their big worry is that they have trouble to find carers, and if they find them, they refuse to use any support programs offered them. That is because what they want is usually not support for themselves. They say, I want continued good home help for my mother, or that the nursing home where she stays should continue to provide good care. That's what they want. They don't want to attend any support groups or go on any vacations or anything.
Thank you.
That also confirms what my own experience, me and my sisters, when we were providing help to our old mother before she died this summer.
And one final question, which is about rating. So presumably, in terms of the supporting carers, that's quite a high rating again that you're giving the system. And the final question is about coordination of the different services that make up, that provide services for people with long-term care needs. That coordination, that integration or coordination, whichever way you want to see it, how would you rate it?
Somewhere around 6, 7, because it's in Sweden mostly a one-point entry into the system, so it's one with the Swedish administrators. I've never heard the word case manager, but that's what they are in practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if, whatever kind of service you need, you go to the same administrator who would provide or not provide that service.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.